Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
It's The In Show, Australia's only show dedicated to innovation from Adelaide, Australia and across the globe.
Hi, this is David Grice and Troy Sincock. This show is all about innovators and entrepreneurs, startups, those inspiring people with great ideas who actually make them a reality. And, so often these incredible ideas affect the way we live. They make our lives more efficient, more productive, or just change the way we think about the things we do.
And in some cases make it a lot more simple as well. So, being able to automate some of the processes that would traditionally take a long time, or it could be how to teach you to do something that you didn't know how to do before. So that's where innovation space is just so exciting.
It really is. And, if you are enjoying hearing about innovation, you can subscribe to the In Show podcast at ozcastnetwork.com. Just hit the subscribe button and you can choose your preferred platform, Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
Or you can go straight to the RSS feed if you like as well. So today we're going into the world of the Don Dunstan Foundation's Thinker in Residence program. And that's a program that's focused on developing a more purposeful economy that's better able to achieve high social, cultural and environmental impact and ultimately grow jobs in the purpose economy. llse Treurnicht is the new Thinker in Residence and an active member of Canada's innovation community. A Rhodes Scholar, an entrepreneur and an executive in a number of emerging technology companies, llse was CEO of Mars Discovery District, an innovation hub based in Toronto. Mars supports innovators and entrepreneurs building high-impact growth businesses, offering specialised infrastructure as well as access to critical talent, capital and customer networks.
It is what we would call today an urban innovation hub, so a bit of a campus if you want. But its location is very strategic. So it's located directly across the street from the University of Toronto, surrounded by some of our top teaching hospitals and research institutes. And the concept is to co-locate all these actors in the innovation food chain. But particularly, we focus on those that have sort of science assets at the root of their innovations. And we particularly focus now on spaces for scaling and growing young companies. But then we also have some very interesting global multinationals and large Canadian teams that have their innovation teams at Mars to, again, create that access to supply chains. We have 11 venture capital funds as tenants. And so the tenant population represents about 6,000 people who come to work in the centre every day.
More from llse Treurnicht a little bit later in the show, but now here's Claire with more in news, including a story about new microscopic cameras that could improve security but potentially destroy what's left of your privacy. What have you got for us, Claire?
Guys, this week I'll also be talking about a robot that can put furniture together. But first, volunteer-run, not-for-profit organisation Copenhagen Suborbitals is planning to send a human into space. The crowd-funded rocket program is expected to launch the spacecraft called Spiker by 2030. It's 16 metres tall and has a 1 metre diameter, which is just big enough to fit a human. It'll shoot into space and then fall back to Earth shortly after. What's different about the rockets they design is that they're made with unusual repurposed items like a cashier system from Burger King and a brake cable from a car. Their first launch was in 2013, which was when they attempted to shoot their Nexo 1 rocket into space, but it only flew 1,500 metres due to a malfunction. It was built by a mere 50 individuals who worked on a budget of just over $18,000 a month that they received from loyal donors. Their next test launch is in May with the Nexo 2, and if they can successfully fly a human into space in a rocket built from cheap materials, it could change space travel forever. Scientists in Singapore have created 2 robots that might be able to put together a chair from IKEA faster than you. The researchers from Nanyang Technological University used a bunch of sensors, 3D cameras and other widely available materials to create the intelligent metal robots. This is quite a technological feat because it's unusual to come across ones that can perform complicated, labour-intense activities. For example, putting together a chair requires visual skills, the ability to control how much much force you use, and good coordination. So, how did the robots perform compared to humans? Well, each robot took pictures of all the parts to identify them. They used an inbuilt algorithm to help them move the parts without damaging them, and then used the force sensors to determine where each piece belonged. All up, the robots managed to successfully assemble the chair within about 20 minutes, 11 and a half for planning and the rest for assembly. Although the steps were pre-programmed into the robots, the scientists are hopeful that one day the bots will be able to build furniture with just a hard copy manual. And just when you thought there were enough cameras in the world, a team of researchers have developed a new prototype that's microscopic. The team from the University of Michigan have created a camera that's just under a millimetre wide. The sensor inside it has a dual role. It helps take the photograph and harvests energy from the sun to power itself. It's hoped eventually the device will be powered by something other than sunlight and will be able to record in real time. But of course, this does raise some privacy issues. Because they're so small, it makes it easier for people to use them irresponsibly or illegally to violate the privacy of others. While this might pique your paranoia, keep in mind they could improve security. They could replace the obvious surveillance cameras in supermarkets, or even be attached to first responders like police, firefighters, or ambulance workers. Although it's just a prototype and it doesn't have storage or transmission capabilities, it does raise an important question. Once they're complete, should these cameras be available to everyone? And that's what's in news this week.
Well, David, what do you think about these microscopic cameras? They are minuscule.
Well, a millimetre. I mean, that's pretty small, isn't it? But when you think about it, our mobile phones these days, they all have cameras in them and they're tiny.
Yeah.
And they're only worth a couple of bucks each. And the resolution these things are able to produce is just nothing short of amazing.
In fact, there's an incredible Hollywood movie that was literally just released in the last couple of weeks here in Australia that was shot entirely on an iPhone. So, you know, the capabilities of cameras is really increased. When you take a look, you know, at the pinhole camera back in the day to what we have now, the advances have been very swift in recent years.
They really have. And just knowing that this thing's self-powered as well, like, how the heck do they do it?
How do you feel about the idea of being monitored without knowing you are? I know, you generally, if there's surveillance going on, there has to be a sign of some kind. But, you know, you're in a shop, you look up, you see the camera, you acknowledge that you're being recorded. The idea that you could be recorded at any moment without your knowledge is an interesting thing, isn't it?
I completely agree, although on the other side of the coin, we're all on Facebook, we're all on Twitter, we have our social media accounts, we're sharing all this content that we have as part of our personal lives and those sorts of things. So really we are out there anyway. Yeah, without people's knowledge, I think there's an issue. At least with our social media, we have the ability to control the content that we're putting out. But when it's something like this, you know, you can think of the ramifications. Because you won't be able to even really see it because it's so tiny, you just don't want it to get misused in any way, shape or form.
I think with a lot of the innovations we've talked about on the in-show thus far, so often the innovation is ahead of the law that governs it. So does anything need to be put in place? And I don't want to be the one that sort of errs on the side of caution, but at the same time, are we just to assume that we're always being filmed no matter where we are in public? Yeah,
that really begs some questions, doesn't it? And I guess at the end of the day, though, the only time that it would really matter to you is if you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you're walking down the street minding your own business and you're being filmed, well, so be it. It kind of, you know, I'm not doing anything wrong. I have a conversation with somebody or whatever it is. But, you know, if I was doing something wrong, then that would be the time perhaps that you would only have to worry about it.
But it could just be something embarrassing. I mean,
it could be scratching your bum.
That's right, exactly. You know, those things that you kind of like to think that no one saw, but probably someone did. But it's just, you know, there's safety in the knowledge that it's unlikely that you were seen.
And let's face it, we've all walked down the street with our fly undone.
That's something no one really needs to see, do they? It's David Grice and Troy Sincock. We're talking innovation on The In Show. You can check us out at theinshow.online, Facebook, and follow The In Show on Twitter. In 90 seconds, we talk to entrepreneur and executive in a number of emerging technology companies, llse Treurnicht, the Don Dunstan Foundation's latest thinker in residence.
Now, Troy, I'm really, really enjoying the process of podcasting. You know, the only time I've ever been behind a microphone before is when I've been singing, you know, as part of a band in front of an audience. But I'm really, really enjoying this.
Yeah, now in that situation, you would have been able to see your entire audience. What's so great about doing podcasts is the audience that you can reach, and it really has been extraordinary for the In Show, now heard in almost 50 countries around the world. We would never have seen that possible.
Yeah, and I have to look at you, though.
I'm so sorry about that. But, on-demand audio has become the way that we now listen to things. I mean, radio exists, but on-demand audio, it's there when you want to hear it. And, that can be so useful in a variety of different applications, whether it's, communicating with, people that have similar interests that you do, or perhaps it's, communicating with people within a larger company.
Yeah, and we're creating podcasts for people that want to deliver messages.
Exactly. Already our organisation is doing, podcasts about literacy and music in addition to the In Show. But what we can do is assist you with your communications within your business.
And we want to work with you no matter where you are, whether you're in Australia, South Australia, or other parts of the world. We're here for you.
Yep. If you want to find out more about how podcasting and on-demand audio can affect your business for the better and have you reach far more people, you can simply email david@theinshow.online or troy@theinshow.online. We'd love to hear from you.
Download the Phoner app before you head to your next event. Find people easier, market yourself better, and get connected using Phoner. That's spelled P-F-O-N-R. Phoner. Available in the App Store now.
Hi, I'm Derek McManus, and you're with Troy and David on The In Show.
The Don Dunstan Foundation's Thinkers in Residence program is social capital, with a range of international thinkers contributing their insights and experience in a series of events. The program is focused on developing a more purposeful economy that's better able to achieve high social, cultural and environmental impact and ultimately grow jobs in the purpose economy. llse Treurnicht is the new thinker in residence, a Rhodes scholar and an entrepreneur and executive in a number of emerging technology companies. llse is an active member of Canada's innovation community and was CEO of Mars Discovery District, an innovation hub in Toronto. David caught up with llse during a series of speaking engagements and asked her how her entrepreneurial career took shape and what she sees possible in growing jobs in the purpose economy.
llse, thank you for joining us on the In Show. Firstly, what got you involved in the Don Dunstan Foundation's Thinker in Residence program?
If I trace it quite a way back, I would say the similarities between Canada and Australia have always been a source of fascination. And over time, we've had a number of connections with different actors in the innovation system in Australia from my vantage point at Mars. And the thing that really was intriguing about the Don Dunstan Foundation's work, specifically and the Thinker in Residence program, is something that we implemented in a bit of a light version in Canada, but this extraordinary opportunity to have somebody who's been deeply immersed in a particular field of practice or area of specialization just come and immerse themselves in your own local ecosystem and pull together some of the threads that you can learn when you begin to triangulate across multiple dimensions. And I think it is a truly unique program globally, and it's interesting since I've been in Australia just having a sense of how it's envied by other parts of Australia as a truly creative way to kind of just, instill some new conversations in the local community.
Yeah, I love that about the program because it sort of brings huge impact when you hear from somebody abroad coming into a particular industry, just looking at it with a whole new, fresh set of eyes and ears and understanding what's going on, and then being able to then report back and provide recommendations and, new things that we could potentially think about or elevate the things that we're already doing. So what are you hoping that will happen as a result of the program, or are you just coming in here just really open and just seeing what the landscape looks like and going from there?
Well, for this particular residency, I think there's an interest to start some catalytic conversations around three sort of themes, I would say. One is Adelaide is a university town in many ways, and similar to Toronto, has quite extraordinary post-secondary education institutions, strong research base, strong healthcare system, a research-intensive healthcare system, and trying to think about how can we move the ability to take those discoveries and breakthrough ideas into the market and get them to users, get them to patients in a more efficient way, given all the shifts that are happening in technology and in the application of technology. So from our experience of trying to advance commercialization in Toronto, bringing some of that into just a look at the Adelaide system. The other element is, how do we get the established corporate sector more involved in this process, and particularly in engaging with both the research ecosystem but also the startup ecosystem. And in that sense, it's interesting to think about how the structures of the economies of our two countries, again, are quite similar, with strong resource base, strong real estate components. So many of the traditional manufacturing industries are in transition and so on. So how do we get that corporate sector that needs to also, perhaps shift its focus on innovation, but how do we make them partners in the process of pulling innovations towards the market out of the academic sector? And then the third element is just, how do we foster more cross-fertilization and cross-collaboration, because innovation in the final analysis is the ultimate team sport, and nobody can fix the challenges on their own. And so how do we get more actors from multiple parts of society engaged in this process, feel invested in this process, and more importantly, contributing to what would be better results for everybody?
Yeah, look, that's really, really interesting, because, getting the corporates involved, I think, is probably one of the biggest challenges, and especially when competition is so fierce in so many different sectors. But you obviously started your journey, your career, in a very different place, didn't you? It's not you weren't a thinker in residence kind of, oversight kind of person. What happened from your school life and brought you into this world of innovation? Because I noticed 2005 you started, or you were at the helm of Mars, and as in not the planet, but an organisation called Mars. That's 13 years ago. And so, to be thinking like that back then, what sort of led you to the point where you were able to jump in?
Well, unfortunately, I can't say it had a very logical trajectory like many of these journeys are. But in a funny way, my time at Mars maybe pulled together a bunch of threads from different experiences, and the messiness of the experiences was helpful in the end. Yeah. But I grew up in South Africa and did education in science, and so left South Africa to do a doctorate in chemistry at Oxford University, and went to Canada to do a postdoc, partly because I met a Canadian, so it was a detour of life. And during my postdoc, although I am have a very, very deep inner geek and absolutely love science, I realized that I was actually more interested in the application of science rather than the discovery process itself. And I was trying always to pull together the threads of how these technologies would be used and how they would change society, so even from a policy perspective. And so after my postdoc, I jumped into a startup company that had spun out of the University of Toronto in sort of materials chemistry, green chemistry we would call it today. And the company had a very strong innovation base, but happened to just hit an inflection point in the market and grew very quickly. So honestly, learned business by just jumping in at the deep end and trying to stay afloat. And after that, worked in a number of technology-based startup, typically within the sort of hard sciences space, and all of them with root systems in the university. So in all of those cases, we took technology discoveries and tried to convert them into products and services. So certainly built up some scar tissue from how difficult that process is. And as some of those companies became successful, we then ran into, of course, the other barrier, which is how do you raise capital for these early stage, still concept-based companies? And so it seemed like we were always begging for money. And at some point in that journey, the largest bank in Canada, the Royal Bank, decided to build a family of seed stage venture capital funds to support some of these early companies and asked me if I would get involved. So we built an early stage venture capital fund, but I sort of think about that as I was very, very much motivated to, can I be on the other side of the table and help some of these entrepreneurs get their ideas to market? It wasn't that I was really ambitious to be a venture capitalist, so it was a bit of an accidental venture capital journey, but we were a very hands-on early stage investor. So honestly, it was much more about the collaboration with founders and inventors to advance their ideas. And while I was in the venture capital side, which was a journey I really enjoyed, actually, very, very interesting work. This project of Mars, or the idea of Mars, started in our community, and the Royal Bank was one of the founding partners, but I also knew some of the other philanthropists and business leaders and people from the university who were involved in the project. And so I was participating more as a community volunteer and support in the very early days when they were trying to build a coalition of people to get this idea off the ground. And was approached by the godfather of Mars, Dr. John Evans, who was a very iconic Canadian in his 70s at the time, working unbelievably hard to try and get this idea going. And he asked me to come and help him. I couldn't think of a better reason to try and support something that he was involved with. And that's how I got involved. And at the time, it was still very nascent. And so the reason why 13 years seems on the one hand a long time and in another way a short time, it was just a classic startup project.
Yeah, I mean, there must have been some incredible vision behind the foundation of Mars as well, because, I mean, I think 13 years ago, I wasn't thinking about innovation in the same way I think of it now. And I think from that perspective, that man must have had just some supervision to sort of see where the future was going and all those sorts of things. So how was that for you in that early days? Like, was it a really difficult process, or because of the foundation that had been laid by this gentleman, was it easy for you to sort of move in and go down the path?
Yes, I absolutely agree. Honestly, I think the creation of Mars is an extraordinary example of civic entrepreneurship on the one hand, that intervention of a group of leaders from multiple places but catalyzed by this man, and really having the courage to think about an idea that seemed impossibly big and really so far ahead of its time. And when I look back at sort of the language we have today around innovation districts and innovation hubs and how the collaborative process of innovation works, and I think back at 2000, I mean, there was no language, there were no incubators, and honestly, one of the challenges was that people didn't understand what they were talking about. And then on top of, so first of all, seeing the future and then being prepared to step in and execute on that vision, I think is extraordinary. And you know, I think a real test of courageous leadership. But then the second part of that equation was very much, if we're going to do this in a way that's going to matter in the world, we have to do it at scale. So not only was it a crazy and impossible idea for people to grasp, it was huge in terms of its ambition. And then the third part, which I think has been so essential to the DNA of Mars, was, you know, we are going to improve the economy of Canada and the quality of life of Canadians. But this is also about using the privilege of Canada and its role in the world to take the creativity and ingenuity of Canadians out into the world. And so there was very much a generosity and a focus on improving society as part of that DNA. And that very much came from the old hospital that was repurposed, where insulin was first discovered and given to a young boy. So it was trying to reimagine the physical place for a new century in a way that was going to be relevant to the context of the new century. And so that was a really extraordinary foundation and leadership. But, you know, John was very honest with me, and I think in his wonderful, humble, quiet way, the thing that tipped me was him saying to me, "Llse, if this was easy, I wouldn't need you." So getting from that vision to execution was massively hard.
Yeah.
And certainly I've never done anything as difficult as the last 13 years.
But you obviously the rewards that you feel are huge when you actually get past those massive hurdles that you must have encountered. But there's the excitement as well. You must have seen so many really cool things being developed and growing and emerging through what you've been doing.
Absolutely, and it's been a journey. I mean, one of the features of a project being ahead of its time is there's no recipe book and there's no script to follow. So certainly it's been an emerging organism, and we've had to adapt and adjust and sort of go with where the energy was. And at the same time, the pace of technology change has just continued to pick up. But one of the foundations and the reason why that location and that big idea was possible is that we have such a strong base of science and diversity of talent and the creativity of the city that we could harness. And of course, those have fueled these very cool projects. But we've certainly tried to build on the strengths of the local community. So in the area of health sciences, for example, we have a very long history. For example, stem cells were also discovered, more than 50 years ago right there. So right now we are really building the stem cell industry of the future, leveraging that legacy and just extraordinary, both breakthrough discoveries, but now companies evolving and therapies evolving in the stem cell and regenerative medicine area that's just blows your mind, not just in terms of what they make possible in physiology, but what they make possible from new business models of bringing therapies to patients. Toronto has also a long-standing history of excellence in artificial intelligence and machine learning, and of course that is now penetrating every sector and every field of discovery. So we're seeing waves of companies in that arena. We have a very, very strong sort of physical sciences materials capabilities. So a lot of companies in the sort of advanced manufacturing, clean tech space as well. So some of the magic is the diversity of cool things. And then how they begin to feed off each other and learn from each other to actually apply technology in truly unexpected ways.
Have you had any situations where you've got two startup companies that are actually competing for the same market? And if so, how have you as an organisation kind of viewed that? Is that been something that you've been able to help both, or do you have to select one over another? Is there a process around that?
Yes, we actually, because we have, about 80 startups in our building among the 150 tenants. But the thing that has been possible because of the physical center is we support about 1,200 startups.
Wow. Or
young companies in a much wider region across not just the Greater Toronto area, Ontario, but also increasingly across Canada. So we see certainly companies that are competing in similar market spaces, but we see often them coming at that market space from very different angles or with different approaches. Sometimes they each have a piece of the solution.
Yes.
And there are really unique opportunities for collaboration, and we can be a bit of a broker where two companies combining their solutions, not necessarily even merging as companies, but going to a larger customer together, can actually, have a better shot at winning business.
Yeah.
But where they are, in a way, almost a little bit more directly compete, we have very sort of strict guidelines between who would be assigned as a mentor for each and how their information would not be shared with each other. And in fact, the advisors would have a firewall.
We talked earlier about raising capital and those sorts of things. Now, I remember when I had my very first, I just thought I was starting a business. I went to the bank, I put my house on, borrowed against my mortgage and, found my money that way. And we now are in this world of looking for investors and that sort of thing as opposed to going to the banks. How is that scenario over in Canada? Is access to capital easy, or is it as equally hard as it is in the rest of the world to find money?
Well, the entrepreneurs would certainly say there's never enough money. But if I compare, what the situation was in 2005 when we opened our doors, I would say that we have a much more robust early stage and even growth stage venture capital market today. It is not equally distributed across sectors. So because we've had significant success in the sort of classic tech sector, you see more investors going into that space, more funds forming, more bigger funds forming, and of course serial entrepreneurs who've had multiple companies and therefore have much better access to capital in Canada but also elsewhere in the world. But areas like clean tech, areas like healthcare that are more capital intensive, where the investors need to really be specialists in that particular field to even understand what that opportunity or the technology is, it's still very, very hard. And in fact, from a Mars perspective, we realize that we can't rely on the market simply to, grow at the same pace of our startup ecosystem. And so we have created, actually, in partnership with the provincial government, a small seeds fund, and we now have small private funds forming and growing to fill very specific gaps, like the clean tech gap.
Yeah.
We've also, interestingly, recently launched a fund to back women entrepreneurs, because one of the realities of our market and markets everywhere is that it's incredibly difficult for women-led businesses, particularly growth businesses, to raise their growth capital from traditional venture capital sources. We also are very much believers that the venture capital model itself is changing. And is only serving really a small subsection of entrepreneurs. And so looking at any and all other ways to mobilize funds, whether it's through debt instruments, of course, revenue from customers is the best way to to grow your business. But also looking at impact investing for those kind of businesses that don't fit traditional investment criteria for venture capital, and crowdfunding, other models that are emerging. So, and actually shifts of philanthropy into the investing space. So we want all of those access channels to capital to be available to our entrepreneurs, partly because there's such a wide range. And we're keen to help facilitate some new models of risk capital that would serve a broader base of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, awesome. So for somebody who doesn't know what Mars is, can you please just explain what it is and how it works and that sort of thing? Because I'm sure there's plenty of listeners that are really interested to find out about Mars and what you offer. So could you perhaps just share with us a bit about that?
Absolutely. It is what we would call today an urban innovation hub. So it is a physical place that was built around the site of an old hospital, but today comprises 4 large buildings around a sort of a central enclosed atrium, so a bit of a campus, if you want. 1.5 million square feet, so it's large. But its location is very strategic. So it's located directly across the street from the University of Toronto, right in the heart of our Discovery District, surrounded by some of our top teaching hospitals and research institutes, but also, in the city, directly on the subway, close to the financial district and our creative districts and so on. The complex itself has a mix of state-of-the-art laboratories as well as office space. And the concept is to co-locate all these actors in the innovation food chain. But particularly, we focus on those that have sort of science assets at the root of their innovations. And so our tenants, 150 tenants, range all the way from top research groups from the universities and the hospitals. We have startup incubation spaces for both lab tenants as well as kind of more classic co-working type spaces. We particularly focus now on spaces for scaling and growing young companies. But then we also have some very interesting global multinationals and large Canadian teams that have their innovation teams at Mars to, again, create that access to supply chains. We have 11 venture capital funds as tenants. And so the tenant population represents about 6,000 people who come to work in the center every day. We use that physical center as a platform from which to then provide services and supports to a much, much larger ecosystem. And the engine room of that is supporting innovators and entrepreneurs who are trying to grow businesses in sort of 4 theme areas: health, energy and environment, finance and commerce, so fintech is pretty active. And then finally a field we call work and learning, which is really about workplace transformation and educational technologies. And we provide to them a very structured set of services with advice, but also access to customers, capital, and talent as the three main things they need to get to scale. And there our mission is, how do we take, the pretty strong, robust startup ecosystem and get more companies to scale? We have a sort of a third dimension of work, which really has evolved a little bit later in time, and that is, how do we get, and particularly in these regulated, complex sectors like healthcare, like the energy sector, like financial services that are highly regulated, are complex, intricate systems, often public sector run. How do we get them to be better adopters of innovation so that these young companies that we're starting on this side can actually participate in our own health system, in our own energy system, as a springboard and a proof point for access to global markets? And that's where this science and art of fostering collaboration in a complex system involves, large agencies, policymakers, big companies, small companies, regulators. It's actually has built our capability in terms of bringing innovation into complex systems, which again, I think makes us more effective in actually being a system changer in advancing the ecosystem writ large. So we have this physical hub. It has a rich suite of very targeted services for innovators and intrapreneurs, if you want. And then, of course, it's actually a partner in the community, building the city, building the innovation ecosystem for Canada writ large, and partnering with partners all over the world.
Ilse, thank you so much for joining us on the In Show, and we really hope you enjoy your time here in Adelaide and working with our community.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much for having me, and I must say it's a privilege to be here, and I'm very grateful to the Don Dunstan Foundation and everyone in Adelaide.
You can find out more about the Don Dunstan Foundation's Thinker in Residence program at dunstan.org.au.
Next week on The In Show.
We're going to hear more from the world of innovation, and Claire's also going to have some incredible ideas being developed from all corners of the globe.
And you can continue hearing The In Show by subscribing to our podcast at theozcastnetwork.com. Hit the subscribe button and choose your preferred platform, Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and rate us 5 stars if you like what you hear.
Now, before we go, here's Emma Saunders from Sustainable Salons talking about the lengths young people are going to create a better future for others.
The amazing thing, and it really warms my heart, is the amount of children who donate their hair. It really just gives me goosebumps to think about, all these kids that just want to donate their hair. And, you ask them the question, why are you donating your hair today? And they're like, well, my hair grows back. Theirs won't. And you're just like, it's an amazing thing. So it's probably one of my favourite stories out of the whole program, the fact that we've literally, become one of the world's largest donor in ponytails through our donations with our program, which is really, really cool.
The In Show, presented by David Grice and Troy Sincock. News by Shannon Corvo and Claire Murphy. Music by Zach Grice. Produced by Jason Walker. To hear more of The In Show, subscribe to In Show on Apple Podcasts or find us at ozcastnetwork.com. A Dave and the Beanstalk production.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.